Hi, my name's Phil. I like to talk about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the option of a no-deal Brexit extension, which is potentially being offered to whoever becomes the next UK Prime Minister next week. But first, if you find yourself enjoying the video, then please consider clicking the like button and subscribing to the channel. So with Boris Johnson insisting that we are definitely leaving on October 31st, but with no realistic way for him to be able to achieve that lofty aim, the EU have come up with a possible way to prevent mad dog behaviour and, in their words, stop Boris Johnson embarrassing himself, and of course a showdown between the UK government and Parliament, which would be best avoided. So from the point of view of Boris Johnson, who we don't know will win the leadership contest, but everyone's behaving as if he will, it could be fed back to his party as extra time to prepare for a no deal. You know, the no deal that he knows they want. After all, not even the most hardened Brexit lunatics will admit to actively wanting the UK to suffer the worst of all Brexit, even though they have an uncanny knack for making money from such an event. But the reality is that the EU would see it as time enough for Johnson to negotiate an acceptable deal. Everyone knows that there's no time to negotiate a changed agreement. And when I say agreement, I'm not talking about the withdrawal agreement part of it. That's set in stone. We're talking about the political declaration. There is no time to do that by October. And it also seems that the EU will gratefully agree to the extension as long as Johnson can sell it as no deal preparation, because he can't make good on his promise to party members. Parliament has just this week, for example, voted to enact law to make it much more difficult for the Prime Minister to shut Parliament down. And that's before they even know what the new Prime Minister even intends. They would definitely take even stronger action when the benefit of the doubt is no longer in the air. But positive steps to exit without a deal become apparent. There is no way that Parliament are going to allow themselves to be bounced by a wayward Prime Minister. They've been voting to restrict the government's power since the start of this year, and they've got a bit of a taste for it now. Naturally, even billing an extension as a period for no deal preparations is not going to placate the hardline Brexiteers. There is a danger that they will see it for what it is, another delay in the process designed to kick that can further down the road. Now, the very real danger that faces Boris Johnson is as follows. The first one is that if Johnson tries to commit us to leaving without a deal by the end of this October, he will face and lose a vote of no confidence from Jeremy Corbyn, leader of the opposition. Secondly, if Johnson does not try and commit to us leaving by the end of October, he may face and lose a vote of no confidence motion anyway if the Brexiteers and his party support it. And three, the Conservatives are utterly convinced that their party is finished if we have a general election before we have left the EU, but that the Brexit party will magically disappear if we leave before that election. Now, it is this fear that has propelled Johnson onto the ballot paper in the leadership contest in the first place. He is truly despised in the parliamentary party by those who really know him. And so you might wonder why he got so much support in the leadership contest. It's because they fear the destruction of their party more than they fear him being leader, and they believe he can rescue the party's fortunes in a way that no other candidate could. This is not without good reason. Ever since it looked all but certain that Boris Johnson would lead the party, the polls have looked much happier for the Tories. Of course, those polls are based on what they think a Boris Johnson government would do, not what it actually will do. There is many a slip to its cup and lip, as they say. But of those three dangers, the only one that is definitely real is that he will lose a vote of no confidence if he presses on with no deal this year. This will involve him either being deposed as Prime Minister or facing a general election, which could result in the same fate. Given that Boris Johnson above all wants to be Prime Minister, and not just for a month or two, that must surely prompt some dread in what's left of his soul. And just because the other dangers are not certain doesn't mean they can't be taken seriously. But if he could get an extension in order to prepare for no deal, with the option of arriving at some mythical agreement, then he might just about get enough Brexiteers on board, or so the theory goes. I'm less than convinced. I suppose it all comes down to whether or not those hardline Brexiteers think that Johnson can force Parliament's hand or not. If they accept that he hasn't the power to force us out this October, they may decide that continuing on with the process of leaving is a better course of action than something that could lead to democracy breaking out in the form of a people's vote. Or they may make the calculation that a general election could return a Conservative Brexit Party coalition, something they'd be delighted at. It's quite difficult to game theory this when reaction would be based on the calculations of people who may not be entirely logical or realistic in their assumptions. In terms of Johnson claiming to be able to arrange a renegotiation on the much shorter timetable of the current deadline, there never was much chance of that, and the probability has dipped even lower. The vote in Parliament this week didn't just make no deal less likely, but it projected the view all around that it was less likely. This includes in the EU, where fears for that cliff edge have somewhat receded. And it wasn't just legislating to make it more difficult to shut Parliament down. You have Conservative MPs in more than adequate numbers promising to shut down the government if Johnson tries to shut down Parliament. In terms of support for the position of a further extension beyond October, Germany's Angela Merkel is keen, as it prevents a no-deal exit, and so is the new EU Commissioner. France's President Macron, he's known to be concerned at the prospect of a Boris Johnson-led UK being a complete pain in the arse as a continued EU member. And who can blame him? Johnson is not exactly known for his diplomacy, having frequently asked if Merkel was a member of the Stasi and why the Irish Prime Minister wasn't called Murphy like all the others. I won't even repeat what he said about the French. So all in all, it could be that President Macron may not be averse to the UK just buggering off, from a political perspective at least. However, from an economic perspective, the shockwaves of a no-deal Brexit ripple outwards. Aside from the UK, which would of course be the worst hit, Ireland and France would be next in terms of collateral damage. For all his tough talking, I doubt Macron wants to further enrage French workers by being seen as the one to trigger this dreadful event. One good piece of news, though, if you are currently a Briton living elsewhere in the EU, is that the EU Commission considers it a priority to guarantee the rights of those Britons, even if there is no agreement. The UK has said likewise in respect EU citizens in Britain. However, it's not as simple as saying it, is it? And there can be no legal guarantees without a legal agreement, of course. It is just a political promise if you set any store by those. And of course, I suppose that goes hand in hand with the bad news for Britons living in the EU, in that, well, the pound has already fallen quite a bit recently, and a no-deal Brexit is going to cause it to fall even further. There are people that are buggered either way. But that's unfortunate. I hope you found the video interesting. If you'd like to support the channel further, then please click on the Patreon link and check that out. And until next time, I'll see you later.